Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor. And today, it's the Robert E. Howard Show. Yes, it's the Robert E. Howard Show once again. But today we're doing something different on the Robert E. Howard Show. We have been talking about Kull, King Kull, the King Kull stories. But today we're veering off and doing something different. We're doing the 10 greatest Robert E. Howard stories ever written. The 10 greatest Robert E. Howard stories. Recently, I did the 10 greatest H.P. Lovecraft stories video. And Roger back there said, you know what you ought to do? You ought to do the Robert E. Howard version of that. The 10 greatest Robert E. Howard stories. You should do that video. So I said, all right, Roger, I guess I'll do it. So don't blame me. Blame Roger. Always blame the undead mummy. That's my policy. So, the top 10 greatest Robert E. Howard stories ever told. The top 10 greatest Robert E. Howard stories, another dopey top 10 list. We're going to go 10 to 1 as we do on this kind of list. Okay, number 10, Kings of the Night. Kings of the Night. Kings of the Night. A Bran Mak Morn story about Bran Mak Morn, king of the Picts, and his doomed war against Rome and the Roman Empire. But in this story, he teams up with King Kull of Valusia. That's right. King Kull is transported from the pre-cataclysmic age into the future to assist Bran Mak Morn in his fight. So King Kull is transported into the future to fight and lead this battle against Rome. And it's interesting. I mean, usually when we see King Kull, we see him hanging around Valusia. But here we actually see him out in battle, in action as a leader of men. And so that's kind of cool. And it's fun to have a team up with Bran Mak Morn and King Kull. You know, that's not something you would have expected. But here it is in this story. And it's really, really cool. It's a great story, has a lot of action, has some superb battle scenes. So yeah, Kings of the Night. You can find this one in both the Kull and the Bran Mak Morn volumes in the Del Rey set. And I think it's also available for free. I think it's in the public domain, so you can pretty much get the story anywhere, and I recommend it, Kings of the Night. Next, number 9, Queen of the Black Coast. Queen of the Black Coast. This is a Conan story. This is when Conan teams up with Belit, the pirate queen. He falls for Belit. She is the love of his life. And it's no wonder. She's tough, Belit. Tough pirate queen. And so they roam around, causing trouble as pirates do. But then they get into some trouble. And it becomes a really good horror story, actually. A really good fantasy supernatural horror story. And it becomes very dark. And it's interesting also because you get to see Conan kind of philosophizing about his life. And you get to see Conan talk about why he's Conan. What motivates Conan? You find out in this story. So, Queen of the Black Coast, which brings us to number 8, The Black Stone. The Black Stone, a horror story by Robert E. Howard. It's actually a Cthulhu Mythos story. I did a video on this for Mythos Monday because it is inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's Mythos stories. But this story is a lot more hardcore than anything H.P. Lovecraft wrote. It's a lot more gruesome, a lot darker in a lot of ways. And it's an excellent little horror story. I highly recommend it, which is why it comes in at number 8, The Black Stone. Number 7, The Shadow of the Vulture. The Shadow of the Vulture. This is a story that takes place in the 16th century, the siege of Vienna. And it is a story with Red Sonja. Red Sonja makes her appearance in this story. Red Sonja, a Robert E. Howard character that was transformed by Roy Thomas into Red Sonja for the Conan comic book. And later on, they made a movie about her. But that character is based on this character, Red Sonja, who was an historical character who lived in the 16th century. And this story is an excellent historical adventure story. It's got a lot of action, got a lot of humor. It's a great story. So, The Shadow of the Vulture. So that brings us to number 6, The Tower of the Elephant. Another Conan story. It's a favorite of a lot of people. For a lot of people, The Tower of the Elephant is their favorite Robert E. Howard story. It's an excellent story about Conan when Conan was a very young man and goes to try to steal the heart of the elephant and meets up with the alien Yag-Kotha, or Kosha. One of those. Anyway, it's an excellent story, The Tower of the Elephant. One of the greatest Conan stories. I highly recommend The Tower of the Elephant. Which brings us to number 5, The Shadow Kingdom. The Shadow Kingdom. So, this is a King Kull story. It's the premier King Kull story and the greatest King Kull story. About King Kull as he has to battle the sinister serpent people who are infiltrating his kingdom. And so he teams up with Brule, the spear slayer, to battle the serpents, or the serpent people. Excellent story, man. Just talked about it last week, and it's really great. Many consider it to be the first sword and sorcery story ever written. That probably should go to Lord Dunsany. So this would be the first American sword and sorcery story. We will give it that. So The Shadow Kingdom, excellent. Which brings us to number 4, Wings in the Night. Wings in the Night, the greatest Solomon Kane story. Solomon Kane, the dour Puritan adventurer who is lost in Africa and comes upon a tribe of Africans who are battling these winged creatures. And this is his attempt to help this tribe of Africans. And it goes horribly wrong. And it's a great story. It's a tremendous horror story. It's one of his best horror stories. And I highly recommend... Hold on. Sorry about that. My dog was getting into trouble and chewing something that she shouldn't ought to have been chewing on. You know how that goes. Roger, he does the same thing. You know, always chewing on stuff you shouldn't chew on, or strangling people you shouldn't be strangling. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes. I was on Wings in the Night. Wings in the Night. That is a fantastic story, Wings in the Night. I talked all about this story at length in a video about why it's so great, so I won't go on too much longer now, but it's fantastic. Which brings us to number 3, Beyond the Black River. Beyond the Black River. Now, this is a Conan story. It's an interesting one. It takes place a little later in Conan's career, but, you know, before he becomes king, and he's a scout at this point for the Aquilonian army. And basically, this is a Western story. This is a Western story that takes place in Conan's world, where Conan is going up against the Picts, because there are Picts in the Hyborian Age too. Picts are all over Robert E. Howard stories. So Conan is going up against the Picts at the very edges of the Hyborian kingdoms, and it's excellent. It's a very dark story. Robert E. Howard says a lot in this story about his feelings about civilization and barbarism and what will eventually conquer. And it's just really cool. It's a really cool look at Conan. The viewpoint character is not Conan. It's another character. So you see Conan from another character's point of view, which is interesting. And it's just a rock solid Conan story. Definitely one of the best Conan stories. And I certainly highly recommend this one because it is one of the best. Not just one of the best Conan stories, it's one of the best Robert E. Howard stories. The action is fantastic. The horror elements are fantastic. Tremendously well written. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. Beyond the Black River. Which brings us to number 2, Worms of the Earth. Worms of the Earth. This is a great story, Worms of the Earth. It's a tremendous horror story. It's a Bran Mak Morn story. Bran Mak Morn, who wants to get revenge on Rome and will do anything to get it. And he kind of goes too far, really, in this story to get revenge. How far does he go? He goes too far. Let me just say that. And he calls up things that should not be called upon. And yeah, very dark story. Very dark horror story, fantasy horror story. One of Robert E. Howard's best. And it takes a lot of inspiration from stories that were written by both H.P. Lovecraft and Arthur Machen. And so he takes elements, the horror elements from stories like that, and puts them in to this story, and it's tremendous. So, Worms of the Earth. That one is fantastic. Which brings me to number one. Not everybody's going to agree on this, but I kind of think that this is kind of Robert E. Howard's ultimate Conan story. It's almost a greatest hits in one story, and that would be The Hour of the Dragon, which is the only novel-length Conan story. It's the only Conan novel that Robert E. Howard ever wrote. Now, he wrote this story for an English publisher who he thought was going to publish it. And because he thought it was going to be published in England, he felt like he could use elements from a bunch of stories he had already written. So you'll see elements from some other King Conan stories, like the Scarlet Citadel. You see some elements of that in this story. And you also see a lot of the Hyborian Age and Conan's world in this story as he fights to regain his kingdom. It's great. This is a great. The Hour of the Dragon is just a rock solid, great Conan story. Excellent villains in this story. The plot is excellent. Conan is fantastic. This is a mature, seasoned Conan. He is a king. He's done it all at this point. He's probably in his mid-40s at around this point in his life. And he's not a guy you want to mess with. And he shows you just how dangerous and how capable and how intelligent he is. And like I said, not a guy you want to mess with, Conan, particularly at this point in his life. He's at his most dangerous and capable at this point in his career. And so he also goes up against the greatest challenge of his career in this story. I love it, The Hour of the Dragon. It's full of great stuff. The Hour of the Dragon. And for me, it is definitely the greatest of Robert E. Howard's stories. So there you go. This is, of course, just my opinion on what the greatest Robert E. Howard stories are. Let me know in the comments down below what you think are the greatest Robert E. Howard stories. I am interested. So there you go. Next week, we'll get back to the Kull series. So I will catch you next time.